Squirrels! So hello, and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra video. My name is Chris, and today we are going to talk about balance changes and what we can expect in about a week's time when we get another balance patch, another balance change. But also we'll get information about what will, be the future, if you will, of balance patches, because apparently the devs, we've heard this for some time that they've been working on, figuring out like a new sort of balance cadence, a new kind of idea for how they can sort of make balance changes in Runeterra, make life balance a bit more interesting, a bit more applicable to the game, because what's happened in the past, obviously it started off really well all the way up through Rising Tides, really, and then Targon came out, and then balance patches kind of became, more few and more far between, and a bit more, sparse in terms of their what they were actually covering in there as well. And so, the community got angry, and then we got an apology post, and then that kind of just repeated itself for quite a few times. So they eventually said, right, okay, we're gonna figure out something else. And that's something else we should find out in about a week's time, I think. So I thought it would be kind of fun to kind of look at, can we figure out what's going to happen? Can we figure out what the future holds for balance patches, before we actually do find out in about a week's time. So that's what this video is about. And I'm kind of here on the patch 2.11 notes, but you're going to see why, because right now we're actually going to go and watch a clip from a Mogwai video, a progress day, the latest progress day that had Steve Rubin on it, as he kind of gave, some hints as to what to expect, and we'll go from there. So yes, I am the 6th host now of Progress Day, as you can see, and yeah, we're just going to watch this short 1-minute clip of Rubin, talking about what to expect, and then we're going to dive in and sort of talk about exactly what that might mean for balance patches in the future. So let's listen.
We're gonna see more 2.11s. Please say yes.
So yeah, it'll be. I don't want to overpromise here.
Yeah,
but the most similar. It will be more similar to 2.11 than it will be of other patches.
Okay.
Even internally, we're calling them variety patches instead of balance patches.
All right.
I don't know. That doesn't really mean much, but I think the mentality
I get it.
is shifting a bit, where we're more interested in doing sort of like lower changes that are not necessarily going to impact the meta. Like I really liked last time I pitched the idea of like, let's just buff one champion from each region, because I think that'll, like, I think back when I did a patch like last year, that was like, oh, we're going to buff an epic from each region. Players really liked that, even if some stuff didn't move, but cards like Genevieve became meta, and we actually saw that like, the Sivir buff was like super impactful, and some of the other stuff was impactful too, I think. Like we see Misfortune a bit more. But yeah, I think that it will look more like 2.11, where there will be more variety stuff. And yeah, we also are looking at some regions that are being underplayed. Like I think the two ones that I can think of are like Targon and Freljord, I think.
So now let's go back to 2.11 and sort of talk about what we just heard. So as we just heard, we know it's going to be somewhat more similar to 2.11 than other things as well. Some interesting things to note, of course, are they're calling it variety patches, which, as Ruben said, doesn't really mean anything particular, but again, it kind of gives you a sort of insight into the thinking behind it. Instead of calling it a balance patch, you call it a variety patch. It does kind of, change perhaps what the focus will be of, these patches, I guess, that they are doing. But he did say it would be more similar to 2.11. I think what he meant by that was, that hopefully the amount of card changes, and perhaps even the type of card changes, will be more similar to 2.11. So we should get, hopefully, quite a few balance changes. That's the hope. He did also mention that, this was in between the expansions, So obviously we get an expansion every 2 months or so, or, that's the sort of general time frame that we kind of work on here. So I think that what we can expect is, pretty much nothing for when expansions come out, and then in the month in between we should get one of these variety patches. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Obviously we'll have to see how well they kind of stick to that, but obviously calling them variety patches and talking about the things that he did, he mentioned doing lower changes, as I think the word that he used. And what I think he means by that, of course, is not focusing on whatever is at the top of the meta, which is really, really interesting. And I think is the main, it's the main takeaway I had from that little segment there. because it kind of changes completely what you should expect and, you know, what's going to happen in these balance patches, right? And I think there's a couple reasons why they've gone that direction that I will explain. So by focusing on, you know, lower things, let's take Tryndamere as an example here, right? So they buffed Tryndamere, and I think this would be a good example for, you know, what they would probably call a lower change. You know, where Tryndamere has not been meta, hasn't been meta really, I mean, outside of maybe Feel the Rush, I guess, for a while, but, you know, that was a very long time ago. And by changing Tryndamere, you can kind of be more confident that things aren't going to go wrong. Because if you change, let's take Aurelia as our example, right? So Aurelia obviously got nerfed multiple times and has ended up kind of in a position where she isn't very good or isn't seen as really being a viable option for a lot of people. And, you know, people who loved playing Aurelia, who maybe, you know, loved that kind of archetype and want to play with Aurelia, have kind of been, you know, stabbed in the back essentially because, you know, they can no longer play the thing that they want to because, you know, the thing has been nerfed multiple times. And, you know, this is always going to happen when you nerf things multiple times. Is that, you know, like Aphelios is another one, right? You're going to end up with a champion that's kind of a hollow shell of its former self. And, you know, even if it's not that bad, people will just psychologically think that it's so much worse because you've nerfed it multiple times. You know, even if it actually isn't that bad, you know, it would take a lot of evidence to suggest to someone that, you know, when you've changed a card and made it worse twice, that it isn't actually just now completely trash. But obviously buffing has the opposite effect, where if you take a champion that's no good and buff them, people feel positive about that champion. They want to play that champion, they're excited to play that champion. And so just the psychological effect is probably the first reason why they thought, let's just focus on buffing things more than we do nerfing things, because they want the psychological effect of the game to be much more positive. And by, you know, focusing on buffs, I think that is one way that they want to achieve that. The second thing that I think is important is that it helps with the iOS problem. So basically, on mobile, because of mobile, you know, the game releasing on that, you have to, or, you know, I'm not any expert on this, but apparently you have to, you know, for Riot, they have to submit their changes to this game 2 weeks before, you know, the patch actually comes out, so that it can get approved by Apple and all that. You know, they can make sure that it's fine, right? So that's one thing, right? So that means that when you're trying to nerf things, you have to hit that deadline of that 2-week deadline dead on, right? You need to understand what the meta is on that day and make sure that the changes that you're working on fit for whatever is actually going on at that time. Because by the time it comes out, it's very possible the meta could have changed already. You know, people could have found counters to things. People, you know, another deck has risen up. You know, someone's found a new deck that's really overpowered or whatever. And it probably means that you're just constantly chasing. And I imagine that that is a very difficult way to work when you have these strict deadlines that you have to hit, but you can't account for what if something else rises up all of a sudden, and then you're chasing that thing as well. You know, imagine you're trying to nerf a Zeralia, right? You try your best. You make a, you know, because they did make a couple nerfs to that deck. I think they hit like 3 cards. You try and hit what you think is going to kill off that deck, but then people just, you know, take out the cards that get nerfed and just put in some other cards, and it's still really good. You know, and they're just chasing it. I think that that's the problem that they've kind of had, and it must be a very tiring and, you know, exhausting kind of job to just constantly have to chase whatever is meta and, you know, try and predict whatever is meta and try and figure out, like, you know, when Poppy's coming out, you know, do they have to start thinking, you know, well, in the playtesting, Poppy was pretty good, so maybe let's already start working on nerfing things, you know, or do they just leave it? Like, there's probably a ton of different things that they have to think about, you know, as they're just constantly chasing and trying to find the right changes, but they have these strict deadlines to hit. Whereas, if you think about buffing a card, imagine we take Braum. You know, Braum, I could have told you that, I can tell you that Braum's bad now. I could have told you that 6 months ago. You know, same with Katarina, same with like Garen. You know, there's plenty of champions that you could say that about, right? Thing is, when you're trying to buff something like that, it's okay if you miss that deadline. You know, if you miss that deadline to get it buffed on a certain patch, don't worry about it. Just do it for the next one. You know, as long as that buff comes at a certain point, you know, it doesn't matter. And if people, you know, are like, oh, we want a buff to this card, you know, maybe then you can say, oh, don't worry, we're working on it. You know, we couldn't quite find the right one, you know, for a certain patch, but we're working on it, right? those deadlines become a lot less meaningful because you're not going to ruin the game. You know, okay, sure, you could do a Lee Sin, but that's why you have the time to sort of test it. Everything becomes a lot more relaxed because no longer are you trying to, you know, desperately predict what's going to happen and hope that you found the right changes that will make it okay. No longer are you doing that. You're just now in a nice, quiet, serene environment where you can say, okay, I'm just going to, you know, work on finding a suitable buff for this card. And it doesn't matter if I miss that deadline because we can always just do it in the next patch. And that's fine. I think that that's the difference. And they've probably looked at that and thought, well, that's just going to make our lives a lot easier. Sure, I would almost be certain that they are still going to nerf some cards. You know, something from Zoe Nami, I think, will get nerfed. Probably like, you know, Aloof Travelers or Banner City Mare or, you know, something in there will probably get nerfed. It'll probably be like a numerical change. You know, Aloof Travelers will be a 3-3 or a 2-4. You know, Banner City Mare might become a 2-1. Things like that. You know, just very simple things that they can just go, surely that'll be fine. You know, where it's a nerf. People will probably play the card a bit less. It won't be, you know, as good. It probably will still be, you know, pretty good. Won't be as good. That's fine. I'm sure that that is probably the direction they're going with nerfs. But when it comes to buffs, you know, you just get to sort of be free. You get to design. You get to work. You get to, you know, sort of, you know, sure, you want to hit those deadlines still, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. You know, the people aren't going to revolt like they did, you know, with Lee Sin and with Azir Aurelia and with, you know, Twisted Fate Fizz or whatever. When you miss that balance patch and you don't get enough good balance patches out there that stop a deck, people will revolt when it's too good. But people won't revolt if you're trying to just buff something. You know, no one's going, where's my Braum buff? You know, no one's raging at that because we don't know it's coming. We aren't expecting it. And I think that that's the big thing, and that's why they've gone in this direction. And so overall, that makes me actually kind of, you know, kind of hyped to see what exactly they are going to do. As Rubin said, you know, it's probably likely that some of the changes will have a big impact and some of them won't have that big of an impact. And I think that that, you know, will obviously bear out and we'll see what comes about and what doesn't. But I think working in this way is probably going to end up being a positive for everyone. You know, the players will probably get to see, you know, bigger balance patches, which, you know, everyone will be like, oh yeah, this is a really great thing. The devs will probably feel more relaxed knowing that, you know, they don't have to be constantly chasing the game and figuring out exactly, you know, what the problems are with the game. The only thing I am interested to see is what happens, you know, when you get another Azir Aurelia. It's going to happen eventually. You know, with this expansion, I don't think we've had any deck that's reached maybe that level of, you know, just meta domination, which is a good thing. But, you know, it will happen one day, and I am interested to see, you know, sometimes you do just need to be like, let's put our foot down and, you know, stamp this out. We can't, you know, we can't just have one deck sort of just completely dominate the game. So I'll be interested to see when that happens, you know, how things work out. But overall, I think I'm, you know, pretty positive about the future of sort of these variety patches. And, you know, for people like me that love playing with, you know, a bunch of different weird wacky cards and aren't necessarily meta slaves, you know, I'm pretty excited to see what exactly they can do. Hopefully they buff Battering Ram, my boy. And yeah, with that said, thank you so much for watching. I'd love to know what you think, you know, variety patches, good, bad, indifferent, you know, should they do something completely different? Are they on the wrong track? What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you next time, and have a really nice day.